So I met Tim Ferriss the other day, and I want to talk about it. Today I'm going to give you the 7 key things that I learned from having 10-minute breakfast with Tim Ferriss in the most obscure place that you never imagined meeting somebody like him. So I'm Joshua Mauk. I am of course, the host of this show, the Advisors Collective podcast. I love bringing these episodes to you as financial advisors, hopefully making our space better for all financial advisors everywhere. I have such a passion as a financial advisor for 19 years to just continue to bring value to people just like myself, colleagues, friends in the industry. So I was just recently traveling to Pennsylvania. I had to go to a city called Lancaster City. And if you're not from there, you would call Lancaster, if you're from the Midwest or pretty much anywhere else, but they call it Lancaster. Super cool town, old school, kind of got that East Coast Philly feel to it. And I'm having breakfast. I'm out there for a small conference, and I'm at the Marriott downtown. I walk in, I'm about to have breakfast. I'm on the phone with my business partner, and I look up and there's a guy, hoodie, slides, sweatpants, beanie, side profile. I think to myself, that guy looks like Tim Ferriss. And I tell my partner, Scott, I'm like, I think Tim Ferriss is in the Marriott getting breakfast. He goes, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? And I was like, yeah, that can't be right. Maybe it's like a doppelganger. And he turns a little bit more and I go, oh, snap, nope, that's Tim. I'm like, hey man, I gotta go. So I hang up the phone. Long story short, I walk up really quick. I say something to him. And honestly, I just said, hey, Tim. He turned, that gave me confirmation it was in fact Tim Ferriss. And I just said, hey, I've read a ton of your books, listened to the podcast for years. I've learned a tremendous amount from you. You always bring a lot of value. And I just want to say I really appreciate everything you've done. He was like, cool, thanks, man. So we went our separate ways, went and sat down. I wasn't going to try to bother the guy who was eating breakfast. But I would say key number 1 is this: take your shot. Don't miss opportunities. When you see somebody that you admire, you see somebody that, you want to approach in life, do it. Because I was talking to a close friend later that afternoon who I was just out, we're both big, Tim Ferriss fans for a long time. And he said, man, it's so cool. You meet people like this. And he says, I don't know if I could have said anything. I'm like, well, I don't know. You got to take your shot, man. You got to talk to people. So first off, take a shot. Number 2 is genuine compliment. It was interesting. I went over to him then after we had kind of first plate of food was done, and I walked by as I was getting another plate, just some fruit, and I came by him and I just said, hey, I've been reflecting. And I was sitting at my table, I was eating, and I was thinking about 4-Hour Workweek, 2007. I'm reading this book about somebody's talking about making a lot of money, optimizing your time, using electronics, using the internet to help you with things like that. He's talking a lot about assistants that aren't in the country. He's talking about using people in the Philippines, if I remember, in India, and how to use virtual assistants and stuff you just never heard of before. And I might be mixing some of the concepts from some of his books in my brain right now, but, later Tools of Titans and so many others that I'd read. And I was thinking about how his podcast, he was one of the first people, I always say he was Joe Rogan before Joe Rogan, a very different style show, but long form, the first real long form podcast where he'd sit down and talk to somebody for 45 an hour, 2 hours, and just go really deep into a concept. And I loved that. And clearly the world has learned to love that because some of the biggest podcasts in the world are 2-3 hours long. So I just walked over, gave him a genuine compliment. That helped start the conversation with sincerity. It just got us really into it and got us talking. Key lesson number 3 was the 4-Hour Workweek. I actually just revisited some of those core concepts, as I said, and I brought those up to him, right? I was like, hey, in my young 20s, your book really had an impact on me in A, thinking bigger, B, thinking about optimizing, time, effort, and energy. And just kind of mentioned a few of those things to him. Key number 4 was podcast innovation. I recognized him for pioneering this long form interview style. I don't know if he actually was who really pioneered it, but man, it feels like it was Tim Ferriss. I'll just say that. And, I did tell him that. And I said, hey, this has always got to feel a little funny, right? It feels asymmetrical in that, like, I know you well, but you don't know me. This must happen to you all the time. And we had a great laugh about that and some stories he told me about people approaching him into the airport, and just genuinely a really cool guy, because then he just opened up because we're just telling stories and kind of getting a couple of good laughs. So lesson number 5 is be gracious and kind. Basically, he had a super welcoming demeanor. He was just sitting there and then started asking me, why am I in town? What am I doing at this Marriott? What do I do for a living? What is my business? Once I told him I had a business, he then inquired about what it was and what do we do? So I think being gracious and kind, he was being super kind. He's a busy guy. But he made the time for us to just have a quick conversation. Key lesson number 6 is deeper discussions. I think going deep, this goes back to his podcast. Going deep with people is how you can build longer, more meaningful conversations that really get into the weeds, and you get out of the surface, you get out of the weather. How's the day? How's your day? Good. We're not getting anywhere as a society by talking like that, right? So it just gave us a chance to really go deeper. A couple of things, podcast, book insights, time, freedom, financial freedom. We chatted about a few of those things. And then I would say the last one, key 7, and this is the big one. The biggest thing I got from him in person, meeting Tim Ferriss for 10 minutes. Authenticity is key. He was so authentic. It was unbelievable. I was so excited that Tim Ferriss was everything that I thought Tim Ferriss would probably be, right? Or how he portrays himself. Guy's wearing slides with socks, sweatpants, a hoodie, a beanie. I got in real late the night before. It's like a 9:30 a.m. breakfast, okay? And there he is. He always talks about he's not a big early riser. He's not super into that. He doesn't believe that's necessarily, in his case, how he optimizes his days. He sleeps in more. And true to fashion, he was sitting there having breakfast quite late. He was sitting in a yoga style, like Indian style, but where it's like fancy, where you put your feet up on the insides and how loose your hips have to be to do that. He was sitting like that in a chair in the breakfast buffet area at the Marriott, which was humorous, perfect posture, eating the food that you would think he would be eating, right? As it relates to just the dietary choices that he had. He was dressed the right way. He was sitting the right way. And then he was just super authentic and asking me questions just like he does on his show. So the point by this being genuinely authentic was he was just super authentic. I was like, everything when I walked away, I was like, oh, that was Tim Ferriss, and I think it's hard for us to do. I think it's easy for us to put on a mask. It's easy for me to get on here. I feel like just being normally who I am and how I talk, being that, through a lens virtually to people as well. So I just thought that was really impactful and powerful to receive from him, that kind of message, but it wasn't spoken about. It was just one of those caught, not taught things. I would say the number one book recommendation after talking to him briefly, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. The conversation kind of made me think about that. He was asking questions, he was steering the conversation, he was keeping it going. I was asking questions back to him, which of course one of them was, and why are you in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Okay. I was like, what are you doing here? It's just kind of weird. I'm like, financial guy. Okay. We have conferences, things of that nature, but why are you here? And he's like, I'm doing an archery contest. There's a big archery contest here at the convention center. And I just thought, well, that's also the most Tim Ferriss answer ever. Learning how to optimize and do something completely out of the ordinary that most people don't do. And here he is, competing at some high level where it's at a convention center in competitive archery. So I just thought that was awesome. So I just wrote here a couple of notes. What are the benefits of long form content and deep conversations? Ask yourself this question, both for creators and consumers. So I was thinking about that with client relationship. Some of my greatest clients are first discovery, that first exploratory meeting. It's long, it's slow, it's going deep. It's long form conversation. It's really truly getting to know them and them having enough time to really get to know me, where we're building a meaningful relationship in this discovery appointment that's going to tell us more about if I want them as a client and if they want me as a financial advisor in their life. They're going to get more from that than, in my opinion, than my investment acumen. and how I sound and my estate planning acumen and just whatever I can speak to. I believe people learn more about you and if they want to work with you by how deep you go just in conversation. Because if people know you care, people can tell that you're genuine. Authenticity is key. If you're being authentic in conversation, it's easy to find the people that you can kind of feel that are being authentic as well, and it reciprocates, and it's easy to do business with people like that. The second question I wrote here is, how important is authenticity in building a personal brand as it relates to maybe if that's online, if that's in person through coffee shops and places that people know you in your community, right? I think especially in our space, in the world of financial advisors, how key is it for people to view you as an authentic person, that the person that they're seeing in the coffee shop is also the person they get on the appointment, that the person that they see driving is also the person that they see in their appointment who's managing their investments. It's the old, like, don't go to church on Sunday, strip club on Monday, right? Or whatever. You can't think, love, and kick a puppy, right? People are pretty much the same most of the time, but I do think that a lot of times people put on a face to try to represent themselves a little bit differently than who they are. And people feel that, and it makes it difficult to do lots of new business because people feel whether you're not being authentic and not being true to yourself. So it was just a really fun conversation, just some tips, some tricks, some things. Go read 4 Hour Work Week. If you've never read that, go look up some of his core books. He did say he's got another one coming out. Go listen to the podcast if you haven't before. He's also got a great newsletter that he releases every Friday. So anyways, Tim Ferriss, really famous, fun to meet him in person, and learned a lot from it and was reminded about a lot of really key things in life from that interaction. So hope this finds you guys well. Have an awesome day. See you on the next episode. Peace. All right, welcome to the disclosures for the Advisors Collective. The conversations on this podcast are intended to provide financial advisors with ideas, strategies, concepts, and tools that could be incorporated into their advisory practice. Advisors are ultimately responsible for ensuring implementation and compliance of anything discussed in accordance with your regulatory and compliance responsibilities and obligations. These discussions are meant purely for educational purposes. None of the information heard should be taken as financial advice or planning. The conversations and opinions that are expressed in the show are that of each host only and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the other hosts and their affiliated companies. This podcast is not intended to give tax, legal, or investment advice. Always consult with a qualified professional. For my practice, securities are offered through Cape Securities Incorporated, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory accounts are offered through Terra Wealth Management.